Broadcasting live from atop the Rocky Mountains, the crossroads of the West. You are listening to the Liberty RoundTable Radio Talk Show.
All right, back with you live. Sam Bushman, Liberty RoundTable, hard-hitting news the networks refuse to use, continues. Promoting God, family, country. That's who we are, what we do. We're truth tellers, ladies and gentlemen. If it's God, family, and country oriented, we love it. If it's not, we don't like it too much. It's that simple. With me now, Lowell Nelson, well known for campaignforliberty.org, among other things. Educating folks and training people across the country is what he does. He does it very well also. Welcome back, sir.
Hey, great to be back. Sam, thank you very much for having me.
Ron Paul's headline, his latest article, is absolutely spot on and discouraging. Lowell?
Yeah, regime change, nation building, they are back. That's what he's talking about in his column posted last week at ronpaulinstitute.org. He observes that there's a lot of people, quote, cheering the U.S. military raid on Venezuela and the capture of its president, Nicolas Maduro. Overwhelming U.S. military power and likely some bribed Venezuelan officials ensured that the operation was swift and dramatic, end quote. Yeah, we're being told, Sam, this is not a war. It's just a surgical operation to remove a criminal dictator. That's what they're telling us. Well, that narrative has been used over and over to justify our interventions over the last, 5, 6, 7 decades. For instance, we were told, quote, the Iraq war would be a cakewalk. Skeptics were ridiculed. The staged demolition of the Saddam Hussein statue in Baghdad marked the triumph of that short U.S. military operation. The liberation of Iraq was to be the first domino in the coming revolution throughout the Middle East, we were promised. Just weeks into the operation, then President George W. Bush landed on an aircraft carrier with a huge mission accomplished banner behind him. Then everything fell apart. The U.S. could not run Iraq. It could only use brutal force and torture to give the impression that we would soon turn the corner. Victory was at hand, they said. Just send more troops and spend a little more money. Ron Paul continues here, quote, but none of it did the trick. None of it worked. In the end, the U.S. sunk trillions into the failed nation-building operation in Iraq, and upwards of 1 million people died, including thousands of U.S. troops. And here we go again, end of quote. Plus, Sam, Israeli officials are saying that this U.S. operation in Venezuela is just a warm-up for the next round of regime change operations in Iran. Warmongering U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham is urging Trump to tackle Cuba next and then Iran. And Trump seems to be going along with these lies of the neocons, their ideology, unfortunately. Ron Paul concludes his column this way, quote...
And let's be clear before we get to the conclusion. We're not saying these countries are great. We're not saying these countries are doing right. We're not saying these countries are peaceful. We're merely saying that we have a general policy as the United States to avoid foreign entanglements. And the problem here is there's a process if we believe we need to be involved. And the process clearly requires congressional involvement and congressional decision-making, funding, and the like. And the problem we don't have that happening. Now, what Congress would say is, Mike Lee first said, hey, this is unconstitutional. Then Mike Lee, after talking to Marco Rubio, came back and said, well, it's probably fine. Well, so now you're talking about the ideal is the Constitution. The real is where we are. And in the real, they continue to, as Ron Paul said, nation build, right? That's a problem. What we want to do is get these oil people to come in, benefit from the oil, send the oil to America as opposed to Russia or whatever, or China. And then you basically have this regime change factor. When we regime change and nation build and we don't have congressional involvement or approval, in fact, Congress was told after the fact of the capture of Maduro and a regime change. The problem that we have is the way we're going about it. What decisions would be made if Congress was involved? I don't know. But I do not know that's the way the founders intended it to be, and no one's changed the Constitution. So if you think it's not good, if it doesn't work in modern times, fine, change the Constitution. That's a really high bar, and no one's done it. So until then, like Tom Holman says, We just need to obey the law. You don't like it? Talk to Congress. I mean, that's really where we are. And now Ron Paul finishes out his column. Lowell?
Quote, Venezuela was just another neocon operation. First comes propaganda, demonizing the country and its leadership. Then comes saber rattling and threats of war. The operation is launched and the quote-unquote objectives are quickly reached, or so they claim. But then it all falls apart. We become poorer as the special interests get richer, and those we claim to be liberating suffer worse than under the previous regime. End of quote. And then he asks the question, will we ever
Well, because
learn?
what you do when you have a regime change like that, you get a vacuum. You get insurgents and enemies of the state that rise up and create all kinds of vacuum-filling tyrannies, little kingdoms, if you will, and little factions that fight, and then it becomes much more unstable. That's kind of what we're experiencing right now, right?
Yeah, absolutely right, Sam. And unfortunately, it's going to end up just as badly as it did in Iraq and Libya, Somalia. I mean, all the other regime change operations. And there have been at least, since 1953, I read several years ago a book saying that there were 193 regime change operations since 1953. Now, there's got to be well over 200 now. And so the CIA has made it their business to do regime change operations around the world, and under this neocon guise of, building up other countries, victory for democracy, all of these various banners that they run under, and it all ends up
pretending these
badly.
people get liberation, right?
Yeah, we claim that we're liberating them. And yet, just like Ron Paul said, it ends up worse for them in the long run. Yeah, today, the Venezuelans are cheering in the streets because, Maduro was a bad dude. And they're glad that, Trump took him out. At least some of them are. But what's going to happen, you mark you mark my words, our words, the words of those who've been watching this happen for decades. Somebody worse is going to take over there, and it's going to turn out worse for the people of Venezuela than it was under Maduro.
And it might even appear better from the outside short term. That may be true. That doesn't mean it's reality. It doesn't mean it won't get worse. And what we have is this long history of this regime change, nation building. For example, are the people in Iran better off than... Well, haven't we dealt with Iran? Haven't they been the boogeyman for a long time? Are people really great, doing well in Iran? No, they're protesting. And we're saying, hey, if they kill the protesters, we're going to go after them. How many countries can we seem to turn over rocks and bad guys, come out? How many nations can we deal with that at a time in? See, we ought to be dealing with none of them. But we seem to just want to step in it at every turn. Lowell.
And Iraq is a key example because in that case, I mean, not only did we lose servicemen, military people, and a lot of treasure in that endeavor, that mindless endeavor, but we also killed about 500 million. That's too big of a number. What was it? 500,000? 500,000 Iraqi children, right? Died.
500,000. Yes, sir.
500,000. That's right. And when Madeleine Albright, Secretary of State at the time, was asked whether that was worth it, she said yes. It's worth it. Yeah, kill 500,000 Iraqi children, and she says it's worth it. I mean,
and now Iraq's just a free, promoted republic with constitutional authority, separation of powers, due process of law. It's all happening in Iraq now, right? Not. Absolutely not. In fact, we're claiming now that, hey, we might have to go into Iraq and do some more work, right? Or Iran now, or whatever, right? I mean, some people say, well, we don't even know the difference between Iraq and Iran. That's the point. The American people don't really see a difference, know a difference, care about a difference. At the end of the day, we don't have any congressional involvement or approval. We don't have a clear agenda, go in, do the job, get out, a clear, limited funding scope. We don't have anything that Congress isn't really mandated by the Constitution to provide, right? Well, Judge Napolitano sees it basically just like Ron Paul and like we do, Lowell.
Yeah, he sure does. In his column last week, posted at ronpaulinstitute.org, points this out. He takes a look at it from a constitutional perspective and from a legal perspective. Now, I know that he leans heavily on the UN. He says, look, it's against international law, and if the UN doesn't approve it, we can't do it. I don't like leaning on the UN. I don't believe that the United States should do that. He leans on him a little bit, meaning he depends on it. He thinks that's one of the arguments against the invasion of Venezuela, is that the UN didn't authorize it. And so, yeah, I'll take that argument but there's a stronger argument against it.
The UN didn't and the Constitution didn't. What about both together?
Yeah, the Constitution is the stronger argument of the pair, in my opinion, Sam.
Amen to that, but I'm just saying when it's both, it becomes more blatantly obvious. We'll talk about Judge Napolitano more in seconds. Yay. President Trump violated his sworn and paramount obligation.
Looking for an IT partner that truly understands your needs? Managed IT Services is the answer. We meet with you regularly to discuss your goals and form a tailored technology plan. Our customers have called us a trusted advisor who delivers. When it comes to IT, we do it all. Firewalls, cloud storage, server migration, and more. Say goodbye to long-term contracts and hello to a team that earns your business month after month. Call 801-706-6980 now and let Managed IT Services transform your IT experience.
Have you ever had great honey? No, I mean really good, all-natural, raw honey? Well, now you can, thanks to localhoneyman.com. We can ship out our locally made honey all across the U.S. So don't worry, you won't miss out. Plus, Local Honeyman has so many different flavors, like Utah Wildflower, High Desert Delight, Happy Valley, and Blackberry, just to name a few. So purchase your delicious raw honey today at localhoneyman.com.
The Foundation for Moral Law is a nonprofit legal foundation committed to protecting our unalienable right to publicly acknowledge God. The Foundation for Moral Law exists to restore the knowledge of God in law and government and to acknowledge and defend the truth that man is endowed with rights not by our fellow man, but by God. The foundation maintains a twofold focus. First, litigation within state and federal courts. Second, education, conducting seminars to teach the necessity and importance of acknowledging God in law and government. How can you help? Please make a tax-deductible contribution, allowing foundation attorneys to continue the fight. You may also purchase various foundation products as well at morallaw.org. Located in Montgomery, Alabama, the Foundation for Moral Law is a nonprofit, tax-exempt 501c3 founded by Judge Roy Moore. Please partner with us to achieve this important mission. morallaw.org.
Basically, Judge Napolitano's headline is Lawless Presidency. He's talking about he believes that President Trump is violating the law. I agree with that. A lawless presidency. You cannot just take congressional authority at will. I know you can say, well, presidents have done it forever, Sam. There's a crisis. It's needful, Sam. It's Trump, Sam. I understand all that. Still not acceptable. President Donald Trump violated his sworn and paramount obligation to preserve, to protect, and to defend the Constitution. And when he ordered his invasion of Venezuela without congressional authorization, hey, that's when it all happened. You can't do that. And you'll say, well, Sam, it's necessary. We got a crisis on our hands. We'll get to the Constitution later, Lowell. That's what they say every time, right?
Yeah, they certainly do. They justify the current or the present intervention by referring to the precedent set by other presidents, and administrations previous to their own. They said, well, Obama did this, or they say Reagan did this, or they say, William K. Polk did this back in 1848. We'll get to that story later. But all of these previous interventions, which were unconstitutional, do not justify the current unconstitutional intervention in a foreign power, right? I mean, it's just the president and the Congress they're out of control. They're behaving really like the British king and Parliament from 250 years ago, Sam. I mean, if you want King George III and his Parliament, the imperialistic actions throughout the world, all over the planet, That's what we're doing. That's what we've been doing for the past 75 years, and it's wrong. It's longer than 75 years. It's absolutely wrong. It's well over 100 years. But getting more into Napolitano's column here, the administration was asked why Trump hadn't complied with the Constitution and sought congressional approval. Well, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said, "Hey, guys, this is not an invasion." And so then Napolitano shoots back. He says, quote, "Okay, an armada of ships, assault helicopters, hundreds of troops, 80 deaths, and 2 kidnappings in a foreign land is not an invasion, but the sale of cocaine to willing American buyers is?" Question mark, end of quote. It's just ludicrous, Sam. But I love the way Napolitano puts that in perspective. If they're not calling that an invasion, but they say that the sale of cocaine to buyers in America is an assault on America, a military assault, that's just so ludicrous. I mean, they are just clown. It's a clown show, like you say up there. Marco Rubio is a clown show. Rubio then said Congress could not be trusted. He's making excuse after excuse. His next excuse for not going to Congress was, well, you can't trust Congress. and by the way, I guess I would agree with him on this point, even though that is still not a valid reason not to seek authorization first. I probably couldn't. Our trust in Congress is at all-time lows. Then Rubio said the administration faced an emergency, just like you said a moment ago, Sam. An emergency. The fire trucks, we need the fire trucks immediately. Well, this is crazy, too, because, there was no emergency just a week ago when this invasion happened. And plus, the Constitution is there. It should be observed more strictly during an emergency than in normal times. That's exactly why it was there. That's why it is there. Well, Napolitano then asks a very good question, quote, "Why is it wrong for the president to violate the Constitution?" End quote. He answers his own question, of course. He says, well, he took an oath to preserve, protect, and defend it. It is the source of his governmental power, right? The states are the ones who wrote and ratified the Constitution. They vested in the general government this authority, and that authority can come from none else than the people, right? The states, the people in the states who vested the government with that authority. Napolitano writes, quote, "The Supreme Court has ruled that all federal power comes from the Constitution and from nowhere else. This is manifested in the 10th Amendment, which commands that governmental powers not delegated in the Constitution to the federal government do not lie dormant, awaiting a federal capture. Rather, they remain in the people or the states. This is at least a Madisonian view of constitutional government." End of quote. Well, opposite of this view, Sam, is this Hamiltonian, this Lincolnian, this Wilsonian view that the general government can address any national problem, foreign or domestic. And every president since Wilson and other authors, podcasters argue since Polk, has held this view, this Wilsonian view, this Lincolnian view, this Hamiltonian view. Ironically, Trump admitted the attack was an attack on sovereignty, while the AG, the Attorney General Pam Bondi, claims it was simply the arrest of a fugitive from justice. You can imagine she's pulling her hair out when she says one thing and Trump says another. Judge Knapp asks other good questions. Quote, "Is it just for the CIA to engage in drug trafficking and then prosecute the heads of state in which the trafficking occurs? Is it fair for the president to claim that the U.S. owns the oil in the earth under Venezuela?" Wow, I mean these are poignant questions, strong questions. Over the past century, we've witnessed the growth in the power of the president and a shrinkage in the power held by Congress. Well, Congress basically gives it away, right? They're shrinking their own power. Congress just looks the other way and hopes for a popular outcome, regardless of the cost in terms of blood and treasure. Well, Judge Knapp writes this, quote, "The result has been the catastrophe we all witnessed in Caracas. 80 people were murdered by U.S. troops in order to capture scapegoats for CIA drug trafficking and satiate the American lust for other people's oil, end quote. That's a pretty strong statement there, too. Well, there's simply no legal defense for this action. And so Napolitano concludes his column with these words, quote, "The American invasion of Venezuela is a body blow to the Constitution. It reveals what many of us have feared, that a might makes right presidency, a lawless, impulsive, authoritarian machine that recognizes no legal or moral limits to its powers, abroad or at home." End of quote. And that about sums up Napolitano's column right there, Sam. Imperial presidency.
And really, the point that Napolitano's making is this. The president clearly constitutionally doesn't have the power. Go look at section or Article 1 and Article 2 of the Constitutions to see what I'm talking about. And therefore, when President Trump takes that authority from Congress without authority to do so, it's not right. So that's the constitutional argument in a nutshell. Hey, you can debate all day long, but at the end of the day, show me where the president has this authority. What they'll say is, well, other presidents have done it. They've done this forever. That doesn't give you authority. Well, people have done it, so it seems to be okay. No, wait, you have not changed the Constitution. Therefore, the supreme law of the land still stands, right?
Well, as long as the people will insist that it stands. I mean, it's just a piece of paper, right? And the founders, the framers, they wrote about this. They said, look, this is just a piece of parchment unless the states and the local jurisdictions enforce, basically coerce or persuade the general government to obey the Constitution. If we don't force them to obey it, they won't. And there's ample evidence, over 100 years of history, proving that they will not obey the Constitution unless we force them to. Sam?
Where do we go from here with this? You know, we can complain about it all day, but President Trump, I'm afraid he's going to become the war president. We're very close on so many fronts. It's not even funny, Lowell.
Yeah, I know, Sam. I placed calls to the White House, left my message saying, stop this madness. I've sent emails and texts to my congressional representatives. We just need more of it. You know, sometimes if we can just melt the phone lines to Washington, D.C., politicians will listen, right? But unless enough people, and it's sad that this is the case, but I'm telling you that it is the case, that unless we melt those phone lines to Washington, D.C., Congress and the White House will not do what we think they ought to do, which is to follow the Constitution. If we had more people jumping up and down about this, making a stink about it, our politicians would do what we want them to do. There's ample evidence of that over the years, that politicians, they want to get reelected, and therefore they generally bow to pressure from their constituents. Well, we're not loud enough right now, Sam. We need to be louder.
Well, and that's the reason that we highlight this column from Judge Andrew Napolitano. You know, he issues an opinion, and what some would say is, well, that's just an opinion. The courts haven't ruled. My response is the courts, all they do is issue opinion as well. The courts do not make law. All they do is interpret law. And if they're going to interpret law, they have to interpret it correctly, or the courts are out in the weeds. The courts have issued wrongful opinions many, many times. I mean, the courts are the ones that used to say that, hey, a black and a white person couldn't get married. Okay, so I mean, we can go on and on with what the courts do. At the end of the day, my argument is this. We need to follow the supreme law. If you don't like it, you can't play games. You can't apply police power in foreign nations. Okay? The Constitution does not grant the president authority to take action inside a foreign sovereign state. That's the problem with this, right? I mean, that's what we're dealing with. Okay? Let's talk about this more with Lowell Nelson, because this is critical. The next columnist doubles down and provides even a third vantage point, not to mention the points that we're making. That means Lowell and Sam. Hang tight. Liberty Roundtable live.
How would you like to help this program reach more people and earn silver at the same time? Call or text 801-669-2211 for complete details.
Breaking news this hour from Town Hall. I'm Rich Thomason. Homeland Security Secretary Noem says hundreds more federal agents are being deployed to Minneapolis and vicinity in the midst of big anti-ICE protests. The demonstrations ramped up following the fatal shooting of an anti-ICE protester last week. President Trump says video shows Renee Good weaponized her vehicle at the time she was shot.
You can't be treating law enforcement that way, whether it's ICE or Border Patrol or our police and men and women. You can't do that.
Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell, whose interest rate policy has rankled President Trump, says he's now facing a criminal indictment from the Department of Justice.
Powell issued a video statement about the central bank being served with subpoenas and facing threats from the Trump administration. The subpoena relates to Powell's congressional testimony last June, but the Fed chair said it's about something else.
The threat of criminal charges is a consequence of the Federal Reserve setting interest rates based on our best assessment of what will serve the public, rather than following the preferences of the president.
Powell warned that the Fed's independence is at stake and that he will continue to serve in the face of political intimidation. Greg Clugston, Washington.
Thousands of nurses have gone on strike at several major private New York City hospitals: Mount Sinai, New York Presbyterian, and Montefiore. Mount Sinai West nurse Dinesh Forbes.
The big bosses at Mount Sinai has refused to give us health care over their profit. They want to slash it. They won't come to the table and talk about it. They just want us to hand it over to them, and it can't work. How can we as nurses be inside taking care of patients when we don't have health care? We need to have good health care so we stay strong.
The walkout comes as the flu has been sending lots of people to the hospital. The Dow down 144. More on these stories, townhall.com.
Everybody loves the season of giving, but now the season of paying for it is upon us. That not-so-wonderful time of the year when millions of Americans open their credit card statements, stare in horror at the balance, and resolve then and there to find new ways to save money. If you're among those Americans, why not start by cutting your wireless bill in half right now with Pure Talk's Saver Plan? It's easy. You'll get unlimited talk, text, and 3 gigs of high-speed data on a super-fast nationwide 5G network for just $20 a month. Just dial pound 250, say Mike Rowe, and you'll save an additional 50% off your first month. Ho, ho, ho. And if you're active or former military or a first responder, you'll save an additional 20% every single month. That's pound 250. Say Mike Rowe for the gift that keeps on saving from America's wireless company, Pure Talk.
My brother and 2 other boys were the ones that got in the car with her, and she was drunk. The road that goes to her house is like really windy, and she was taking that road at 80 to 100 miles per hour and hit into the road barriers. Her door flung open. She ran out across the street to get away from it, and the other 3 boys were trapped in it, and the car exploded. And then when my mom found out about it, she called me at work. I don't care what you have to do, just get up here to the hospital. You know, I parked my car and I went inside. They took us back to this little room. My mom told me that Jay had been killed, and I lost it. The other people, they're like, well, you can drink, but just be careful when you drink, you know? So I don't want anything to do with it, because it took my brother away from me.
A public service message from The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
As you are aware, America is divided over every fault line possible. This is intentionally fostered by those who do not love God, family, or country. We believe a peaceful future as a free people absolutely depends on civility. Clarion Call for Civility is looking for funding and volunteers at every level to make our hopes and efforts a reality. Please donate, sign our pledge, and help us in our sacred cause. Please visit callforcivility.com for more details. Callforcivility.com.
Bypass the mainstream narrative with Liberty News Radio at libertynewsradio.com. Engage with charismatic hosts live or on demand. We cover the crucial news focused on God, family, and country. News that other networks simply refuse to use. Think of LNR's hard-hitting news and podcast at your fingertips, anytime, anywhere. Join us at libertynewsradio.com. Empower your day with the truth, because the truth will set you free. libertynewsradio.com.
Well, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Hi, this is Lowell Nelson. I am riding shotgun this morning with Sam Bushman, your host here on Liberty Roundtable. The topic this hour is Venezuela. There's so many good articles about it and so much to be said about it that we're picking up another article now, this one by David Stockman. He's a columnist who dishes out more detail than you can just easily digest. Long articles, informative articles, and I highlight him occasionally because he is so good. In fact, he was a former director of the budget office under Reagan's administration, so he really knows the details of how the administration of a U.S. Government runs. Well, his article last week about Trump's war in Venezuela is just an excellent. He first takes a shot at the drug war, and then he explains why the stated reasons for Trump's war on Venezuela make no sense. There's two reasons that Trump, gave for his attack on Venezuela. We'll get into each one of them. But first, he takes a shot at the drug war. Quote, Nixon's feckless war on drugs was surely among the stupidest projects of state ever conceived on the banks of the Potomac. Washington's writ criminalizing cocaine raises the street price of cocaine from about $1,000 per pound to an actual street price of about $54,000 per pound. That's right. Washington's idiotic drug war generates an excess margin of $53,000 per pound of white powder owing to artificial scarcity and supply losses from law enforcement interdiction. These corpulent margins, in turn, are available to fund the most vicious and profitable black market criminal supply chains known to man. The resulting violent enterprises literally flood the zones from the cocoa farms of Colombia to the dime bag pushers in Columbus Circle, New York, and all the cartels, drug lords, and thugs in between with a cornucopia of money. End of quote. So I read this to give you a feel for his writing style, right? It's somewhat satirical. It has an edge that demands your attention, and it has an ample detail that support his conclusions. I just love his writings. Anyway, he criticizes Uncle Sam and the foolish legislators who perpetuate this feckless war on drugs. And then he provides some perspective on how dangerous cocaine is or isn't when compared with other causes of death. I found this really interesting, Sam. I did not know the relative fatality rate, mortality rate, I guess, of cocaine compared to other health problems. But he lays it out here because he knows the data. He's big on data. He says, quote, of course, the public health rationale for this prodigious level of government subsidization of crime is that cocaine used in excess can be harmful. Well, yes, the annual fatality rate among users is about 0.1%. As it happens, however, that's the same as the 0.1% fatality rate for alcohol users. Well, it's actually below the 0.2% fatality rate for active hang glide pilots. And it's far, far below the 1.7% annual death rate for tobacco smokers. And of course, all of these pursuits are fully legal. End of quote. So basically what he's saying here, Sam, these statistics, it seems like the fatality rate for alcohol users matches the fatality rate for cocaine users. And so you have to ask yourself, well, why isn't alcohol illegal? As you know, it was illegal.
Well, they tried to do that. It didn't work out too well, sir.
Yeah, during Prohibition, right? But common sense returned to the people, and prohibition was ended. So you cannot just make a law against the use of something and expect everyone to quit using it. That's the reality of the marketplace. That's just going to happen. And so anyway, Stockman continues his column. He shows that Venezuela is a very minor player compared to Colombia or Mexico. I found this very interesting too. The allegation that President Maduro is the head of a massive drug cartel is dubious. And here's the kicker, quote, Venezuela supplies just 8%, which is 51,000 pounds, of the total U.S. cocaine supply of 635,000 pounds annually, end of quote. So, Trump is using these $40 billion carrier groups to blow up puny speedboats carrying just 8% of the cocaine that comes into the United States. None of it is grown in Venezuela, by the way. That 8% that comes through Venezuela comes from Colombia and other sources. This is just fascinating, this story. Stockman takes his readers much further into the weeds on the drug war, but then he blows apart the second state. Well, yeah, okay. So that up until now is basically the first reason Trump declared war on Venezuela. Well, he didn't declare war; he just went in and assaulted them. Right? Is this idea that the drugs coming from Venezuela in the United States is the reason we need to go take out Maduro? Yeah, right. If only 8% of the annual, of the source annually is coming from Colombia, does that give us reason to take out Venezuela as a player in the drug? And of course, that we're just increasing the price and how lucrative it is to deal cocaine by doing what we did. It's just crazy. Okay, so then Stockman takes his readers. He blows apart the second stated reason for Trump's war on Venezuela, and that's oil. Right? The first reason is drugs, or cocaine more specifically. The second reason for the Trump's war on Venezuela is the oil. Now, it's true that Venezuela has plenty of oil in the ground, but Stockman says it's the wrong kind. It's what they call heavy oil, very expensive to refine. Too expensive at the moment, in fact. It is not like West Texas or Saudi oil, or what they call sweet oil, or sweet crude, which costs a lot less to refine. And then he gives us the detail on it. He says this, quote, the supply curve ranges from $30 per barrel for light sweet crude, meaning the stuff out of West Texas or from Saudi Arabia, to upwards of $100 per barrel for Venezuela's heavy oil. Accordingly, at the present time, with global market crude oils at $70 per barrel, the two leading Venezuela grades generate implied economic losses of $35 to $50 per barrel. End of quote. So not only is Venezuela oil unprofitable right now, Sam, but it produces only 2% of OPEC's daily production of oil. So not only is it doesn't make financial sense to refine Venezuela oil right now because it costs too much. It costs $100 per barrel to refine Venezuela's heavy oil, but the global market price on crude oil right today is $70 per barrel. So you're going to lose $30 per barrel for every barrel that you refine of Venezuelan oil. It's too heavy. It's too crude. And plus, it only represents 2% of OPEC's daily production of oil. So Trump's claim that the U.S., by seizing Venezuelan oil, will reap a bonanza and reduce the price of oil in the world market simply makes no sense. It just makes no sense at all, Sam. And by the way, Larry Johnson, in a related column, I couldn't quote all of these columns, but Larry Johnson makes a point. He estimates Venezuela produces approximately 0.7% of the global total, whereas Stockman estimated 2% of the global total. So the bottom line, Sam, Trump's war on Venezuela for the stated reasons of cocaine and oil simply make no sense at all. There's got to be other reasons for his intervention, for his attack on Venezuela, because these two do not make any business sense, any economic sense at all. Well, what could be some of those other reasons? Well, Philip Giraldi, in a related column, discusses a partnership between Venezuela and Iran and Hezbollah, and the fact that the Israeli government was very, very pleased with Trump's attack on Venezuela. It seems as though Israel is behind a lot of evil these days. Giraldi also cited a Fox News report claiming that Venezuela was Hezbollah's most important base of operations in the Western Hemisphere, strengthened by Iran's growing footprint and the Maduro regime's protection. Wow. And then, in a related column, Ryan McMahon drew 3 key lessons. I don't know if we want to hit these or not.
Yes,
Number
we do,
one,
sir.
Okay, 3 key lessons from the U.S. intervention in Venezuela. Number 1, the U.S. Constitution means nothing. The attack occurred without congressional approval. Trump notified oil companies before he notified Congress, in fact. Number 2, international law applies only to other countries, but not to Israel and not to the United States. Right? I mean, we lectured Putin for invading Ukraine after the U.S. occupied Afghanistan for nearly 2 decades. That's hypocritical. Third big reason, democracy doesn't matter. Even though politicians claim that the U.S. replaces bad guys with good guys, what really matters is that foreign regimes act like our puppets, being compliant
and what
with
really
our
matters the
policy
most,
and
ladies and gentlemen, is the upholding of the supreme law of our land. That would be the Constitution, ladies and gentlemen. Liberty Roundtable Live.
Cybercrime is exploding. Take Sarah from Sweet Delights, whose world crumbled after having to close with not being able to bounce back. Small businesses are prime targets, but the right strategies can keep yours safe. Jay Hill, CEO of Network Providers, has co-authored The Cyber Playbook Simplifies Cybersecurity for Business Owners with Strategies to avoid costly breaches and fines. Build a strong cyber attack response. Secure your business with key protections. Cyber threats aren't slowing down, but you can stay ahead. Protect your business. Ensure its security for tomorrow. Get the Cyber Playbook today at networkprovidersinc.com/cyber-playbook or call 385-446-5500 now.
Introducing Managed IT Services from NPI. We offer top-notch data backup and recovery, email spam protection, and network security tailored to your needs and budget. With 20-plus years of experience in the medical field, our HIPAA-certified consultants know what it takes to protect sensitive information. Don't settle for less. Give us a call at 801-706-6980 and experience the difference with Managed IT Services. Remember, your IT support should be fast, efficient, and reliable.
Introducing PrepStartsNow.com, your ultimate guide to readiness and peace of mind. We offer practical preparedness tools, training, and education to take your family's household readiness to the next level. Browse the prep shop for essential products, check out our planning guides, and stay informed with our prep blog. Visit PrepStartsNow.com and subscribe to our emails for exclusive offers, new products, and future events. Remember, preparedness begins with PrepStartsNow.com.
All right, back with you live, ladies and gentlemen. There's so many issues, but the bottom line is we've got so many people, Lowell, standing up for the truth constitutionally speaking here. It's not even funny. The problem is we don't have enough mojo to really make that the standard. The mainstream press in bed with the rest that seem to want to pervert the supreme law of the land, and that's really why we're in the, quote, crisis we're in, if you will.
That blueprint for liberty, which is what you call the U.S. Constitution, Sam, and I love the moniker. The blueprint for liberty is what it is, and because we have failed to follow it, observe it, protect it, defend it, support it, adhere to it, that's exactly why we're in the mess we are in. If we would simply follow that blueprint for liberty, then we would have liberty, and more people around the world would have liberty too, by the way. We wouldn't be the biggest bully in the world running around killing people. So that is that. Well, Sam, most Americans do not understand the Monroe Doctrine. This column by Larry Johnson, and I appreciate his writing this column. I was very interested in reading parts of the Monroe speech because I I'd never read the Monroe Doctrine. I mean, yeah, he makes a statement. He heads his column with it. The leading statement in his column is most people have never read the speech that President James Monroe made to the U.S. Congress on December 2nd, 1823. Well, I know I haven't. Sam, have you read
so
that?
You asked me,
speech?
have you? The answer to your question is yes. But let me be
good.
honest and Let me be honest and candid, though. No, until you gave me your notes, and then I went and looked it up and read it before the show.
Oh, good.
That's the truth. That's the truth.
That's awesome. You're the best, Sam. Well, as you know, and I haven't read it. I've only read the parts that Larry
and
Johnson
without you
quoted
pointing
in
it
his
out, I
article.
wouldn't have. Right? Without you pointing it out, I wouldn't have, though.
Yeah, well, and maybe by our talking about it this morning, maybe we'll have a boatload of people go read it. I think that'd be fantastic.
Amen. Totally.
As part of that speech, President Monroe outlined a policy that is known as the Monroe Doctrine, and understanding what President Monroe actually said has taken on more importance. Why? Well, because Donald Trump referenced the Monroe Doctrine to justify his kidnapping of Venezuelan President Maduro. Well, probably his understanding is the same as mine was before reading this article by Larry Johnson. Because, Larry Johnson, he writes this quote, I am going to show you that President Monroe said nothing that would excuse or support Trump's action. To the contrary, Trump is behaving like one of the old European colonial tyrants, end of quote. Yeah, because I don't know about like you, Sam, but when I was in public school, I learned what I learned about the Monroe Doctrine was that it simply meant that the Western Hemisphere was off limits to any foreign power. And I'd be interested to know what you thought about the Monroe Doctrine before reading it this morning, Sam.
Say that one more time.
Yeah, what did you think the Monroe Doctrine was before?
Well, all right. So I
reading
learned in government school, right? I just wanted to make sure I clearly understood. I learned in government school, and to me, the Monroe Doctrine was, hey, we want to be peaceful. We just want to stop bad guys in our hemisphere. That's basically all.
Yeah.
And
that's
in general, that's right, but it lacks the specificity. Yeah, specificity required. Because really, first off, it only talks about, Britain and European countries. It doesn't say anything about the rest of the world, number one. So to expand it to the rest of the world, you can do that if you want to, but you're expanding it. You're not really relying on the Monroe Doctrine. You're relying on a modern manipulated interpretation. Really what it basically said is, hey, we're not going to mess with anybody if they don't mess with us. If you do escalate in our hemisphere, we will oppose you. And that's the truck they can drive, that's the hole they can drive a truck through. They'll say, well, hey, people are messing in our hemisphere. That's why we can look at Russia's ties to Venezuela, look at this, look at that, but the problem is it's a modern interpretation. If you look at the Monroe Doctrine, it's secondary to the Constitution. And the Constitution clearly says Congress has authority in these matters, not the president. The president only gains authority when Congress gives him the laid out decision-making and funding required, right?
Well said, Sam. Absolutely.
So the modern reading of that says, first off, don't expand it and claim it's the Monroe Doctrine because it's not. You're lying to me. Secondly, hey, the Monroe Doctrine is still secondary or subservient to the Constitution. We need to look at the Constitution. If Congress wants to go ahead and do their job, pass it to the president, fine. If you believe the Monroe Doctrine is that important and you want to change the Constitution, fine. But until then, the Constitution reigns supreme, sir.
Absolutely right. This is what Monroe actually said in his speech, quote, the American continents, by the free and independent condition which they have assumed and maintained, are henceforth not to be considered as subjects for future colonization by any European powers, end of quote. In other words, Monroe's focus was on European colonial imperialism, just like Sam said. Didn't talk about China, didn't talk about Indonesia or India. It focused on European colonial imperialism. And yet Trump and most presidents before him believe that the Monroe Doctrine gives the United States veto authority over political or economic relations any country outside the Western Hemisphere can have with Canada, Mexico, and the countries in Central and South America. Quote, President Monroe did not declare that the U.S. would be the final arbiter in deciding whether a country in Central or South America can voluntarily form a political or economic alliance with another country, such as China or Russia, end quote. That quote came from Larry Johnson, not from the Monroe Doctrine. Monroe, he wanted to keep the U.S. out of wars that were being fought in Europe in the 1800s. That's why he said what he said in 1823. And so quoting Monroe again, he said, quote, in the wars of the European powers, in matters relating to themselves, we have never taken any part, nor does it comport with our policy to do so. It is only when our rights are invaded or seriously menaced that we resent injuries or make preparations for our defense. With the existing colonies or dependencies of any European power, we have not interfered and shall not interfere. But with the governments who have declared their independence and maintain it, we could not view any interposition for the purpose of oppressing them or controlling in any other manner their destiny by any European power in any other light than as the manifestation of an unfriendly disposition toward the United States. End of quote. Now that was a mouthful, so let me just boil it down here. Basically, he said two things. Number one, the U.S. will act only if it is attacked or threatened by European powers. That's very clear. Number two, the U.S. will not interfere with existing colonies or dependencies in the Americas. However, if the people in Mexico, Central America, or South America decide to declare their independence, from the European powers, then any European military action against those former colonies would be viewed as an attack on the United States.
In other words, if people want their own independence, they want freedom, we will make sure if they really want it that they'll get it.
They'll give our support. That's right. That's what the Monroe Doctrine, that's what Monroe said, President Monroe said. And in other words, writes Johnson, the U.S. policy proposed by Monroe gave priority to those American countries that declared independence. It basically gave them a tacit promise that the U.S. would support them. Right? If they want to declare their independence, and then some European colony or country like Portugal comes in and starts, batting them down, knocking them down, the U.S. would go and help that colony, secure its independence, maintain its independence. Well, this did not grant the U.S. the right to unilaterally insert itself into the political affairs of countries in Central and South America, nor did it empower the United States to carry out regime change operations in those countries simply because we didn't like the new rulers or the structure of the new government. Well, it's exactly what happened in Venezuela. So this simply does not, the Monroe Doctrine, citing the Monroe Doctrine as justification for going in and kidnapping Maduro simply is, what do you say, non sequitur. It doesn't make any sense. The Monroe Doctrine doesn't justify the U.S. Action in Venezuela. Well, and then Monroe made a policy statement that every U.S. president in the 20th and 21st century has ignored. No interference in the internal affairs of other countries. Quote, our policy, this is Monroe talking, our policy in regard to Europe is not to interfere in the internal concerns of any of its powers, to cultivate friendly relations with it, and to preserve those relations by a frank, firm, and manly policy meeting in all instances the just claims of every power, submitting to injuries from none. End of quote.
So is Denmark in Europe?
No. Yes, Denmark is in Europe, yes.
Yeah. So therefore, Greenland, then, we shouldn't be pushing that we're going to take it, that we got to have it, that we need it. Now, we can talk about buying it, but that's all.
Yep. Greenland is part of Europe. Yep. Just like the Azores are part of Portugal out there in the middle of the Atlantic. But, Larry Johnson goes on to cite this war with Mexico since President Polk, and I mentioned him earlier, but in 1948, the U.S. provoked a war with Mexico by annexing Texas and manufacturing a border crisis. And so this was, the Monroe Doctrine was issued in 1823. Well, just 1848, like 25 years later, we broke with that doctrine. We violated the doctrine, and we've been violating it ever since, Sam.
Amen. And I personally agree with the Monroe Doctrine. But I also say, remember, the supreme law of the land even trumps the Monroe Doctrine, or the expansion thereof especially. Ladies and gentlemen, we got to have sound, truth-telling folks. Go read it, see if we're correct. Would love to have you understand the truth of the matter as well. For Lowell Nelson, campaignforliberty.org, thank you so much. Incredible, detailed information that America ought to pay attention to. Ladies and gentlemen, he does a great job for Campaign for Liberty. Campaignforliberty.org, RonPaulInstitute.org. Great commentaries. I'm Sam Bushman. God save our republic.